I'm Katz from the law school. I'm not speaking today, but our speakers are continuing our theme of varieties of ways of doing feedback. In the first hour, we're going to have two speakers, Keith Baker and Joel Katz, who both are professors at the medical school. And then in the second hour, we're going to have Terry Fisher, a professor at the law school, speaking about feedback. And as always, we're also interested in how things that are done at the medical school or at the law school can be used in other schools so that it's not just what they do, but how can we reconfigure what they do to be useful to the rest of us. And since I'm not speaking, I'll stop speaking. Keith?
Hi, I'm Keith, and Joel is right there. I'm going to speak for about 35 minutes, and some of the information will provoke questions. Feel free to just say whatever and ask the question as we go. This might be novel. Your background's probably a lot different than mine. So, I went to college and all that. But I work with residents. I'm a residency program director. I work in a hospital. I work in the ORs at the Massachusetts General Hospital. I do some didactic teaching where you talk kind of at people and do interaction. But most of my teaching is with people, with real patients who have real problems. And I'm interacting with them in that setting. That's typical for what we do. And so that's the origin of much of this stuff. We have a pretty good feedback and evaluation system in my program, and I won't tell you how we do it, but I'll instead tell you a little bit about some of the underlying principles that guide how we try and do feedback, both from the recipient side, which is the trainee, the doctor, and the faculty side, who's delivering the feedback to change performance. That's the goal for us, always to improve performance. It's that straightforward. Where I come from, we always have disclaimers. I'm not getting paid a lot of money. Have a nice day. So let me be clear. It's not a ding on the place, it's how it is. So really critically in medicine, I'm on the evaluation and feedback committee at Partners Healthcare. I'm on the subcommittee for that. And right away, we've tangled up two problems that are really different. We've tangled up evaluation and feedback. We put them in the same sentence. We have evaluation and feedback forms. And these are two separable, independent, different purpose statements. So I'm not going to talk about evaluation today. That's a whole separate situation. I'm happy to talk about it, but that's not the focus. Evaluation, from my perspective, is a judgment about how you're doing. Do you meet the standard? Are you below average? Are you doing okay? The Board of Registration in Medicine wants that, stuff like that. What I'm going to talk about is something called feedback. And for me, feedback is singularly the act of helping somebody get better. So it's information delivered to the person to help them get better, irrespective of the current level of performance. They can be the best, fanciest person in the whole class. Fine, we're going to give them information that will help them perform still better. That's what feedback is going to be for. So I don't know if this is a bad joke, me even asking this to you, but if you think in your mind, the medicine is founded on the concept of self-assessment. Professional development, you look in and say to yourself, gee whiz, I need to get better here and there. I'll take some CME credits. I'll get better in this or that. Turns out that where I'm from, and it turns out all around the country, self-assessment is just about a bankrupt process. So we don't use it. I don't depend on it. Instead, I want external feedback and measurement on performance. You can self-assess all you like, but you better get some external assessment or you're going to fool yourself badly. And I'll give you an example of what that looks like in just a second. This is a cute study. I say it's cute because it just drives the point home. These are medical students, and they've gone to their clerkship at some medical school. I don't know the name of the medical school. But they said at the end of the clerkship, where they've tried to impress the faculty and the residents, how have you done? And they write down how well they've done. And then the residents who've supervised them and tried to teach them, and the faculty member who've supervised them and tried to teach them, grade them or evaluate them. And the relationship between what the student thinks they got and what they actually get delivered for a grade is not a very strong relationship. So self-assessment here is a good example of it not working well in the medical domain. It is cute if you ask them how hard they work. The more hard they work, that does correlate with their desire for the A. So there is a relationship between how they want an A for effort, which I can't blame them for that. This is much more serious. This is a study that came into our flagship journal called the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA. And that's when you look at physician performance in a quantitative assessment where you can really look at outcomes. How well did you actually do? And you correlate that with how well the doctor thought they did. And the relationship is not very good. It's very weak. And the problem here, it says, is it's even weaker. It's actually really bad for those who are performing quite poorly. So there's this strong dissociation with those who are least able in thinking that they're just fine. And graphically speaking, this study here is one, if you want to entertain yourself, I recommend this study because it's an entertaining study to read. The title of the paper is Unskilled and Unaware, and I'll describe the experiment. These are college students. Unless you think these are irrelevant specimens, this kind of a thing has been replicated in the medical domain, with medical doctors, and kind of every kind of person you can come across. So what they've done here, this is simple. This is math, so you can't really argue with the results. It's math. They've given the math test to the college students. They've graded the math test, but they haven't told the students how well they've done yet. But before they give the test back, they say to the student, hey, how well do you think you did? So here we have on the y-axis the percentile. So 50 percentile would be average. And you can see here that the students thought they were, this is the bottom quartile, those who didn't do well. They thought they were a little above average, and then it got worse from there. This is how well they actually did. So lowest quartile to top quartile. So you can see this big uncoupling between how well people actually do and how well they thought they did. So the bottom component is the unskilled, in other words, didn't do well, and unaware, thought I was above average. So that's the uncoupling that I worry about. I've quit trying to fix folks who have this problem. These are the people who think, oh, I didn't do that well, but they're doing really well. Fine, you can worry about that if you want. I actually think that drives performance. That uneasiness with their performance, I think, is part of their driver, so I actually don't want to fix it, unless it's pathological and that's unusual. So I leave this alone. These people, I think, accurately self-assess because they got lucky. And the rest of them, it just gets worse from here. These are my problem kids. As a program director, I have doctors who are real sure they're above average. And they will argue with you, and they will seek legal counsel. I don't know who here is actually a lawyer, but they will seek legal counsel to prove that I am wrong because they think, doggone it, they are above average. And what I'm saying to them is simply wrong. So this is where program directors have our largest trouble. And the neat thing about this is the big irony of this paper was the concept, it's actually a paradox, that in order to accurately self-assess, you must be competent to know what's a good performance and a lousy performance, which is a paradox because those who aren't competent can't assess and therefore we're stuck. So how do you accurately assess? So in this case, you can actually fix this graph to become much more coupled in the average and above average range. So if you give all the tests to the kids who know what they're doing before the grades are given out, the kids who know what they're doing will shuffle through the papers and realize, oh, most of the kids in the class don't know what they're doing. Actually, I really am that good, and they'll upgrade their assessment. These kids, they don't know right from wrong, because that's why they're in the bottom bit of the class. They look at everyone else's paper and go, yeah, everyone else did like me, not bad average, and they don't move. So this group does not correct easily. This group corrects easily. The origins of this are fascinating. It's the overconfidence origin. And there's a very nice paper in Nature a couple of years ago that drives the point home that this is probably an evolutionary mechanism that we all have. And it's a fun read. It's a well-done modeling paper that if you're into that kind of stuff, it's a hoot to read. So now we've got our person who's over here who's having trouble, and we have to come to terms with them and let them know that the performance that they're rendering is not as good as we'd like it to be. So we want our faculty to help demonstrate to the resident that things need to get a little bit better. And it turns out, I don't know about you, I mean, when I ask this of faculty, they usually say, oh, I don't like doing it, but I guess it's my job. That's how most people react to this. Nobody likes doing this, and there's some people who run real fast away from doing this. In our faculty, we have 150 doctors that are intensive care unit doctors, anesthesiologists at the MGH. I would estimate 15% of our faculty will do this and not run away from this. Maybe 20% at the most. The remainder find neat ways out of this circumstance of delivering bad news. And there's a special name for this, which I think comes out of the British lingo, the mum effect. And this is a fun paper because it's a human behavior paper about what do adults do when faced with the option of delivering bad news, and where bad news is defined as anything really not positive. And the answer is they just demur. They run off. They don't do it. Which maybe makes this problem I've already mentioned, which is the people who are having troubles. Now they don't even get the information that they're not doing well, so they continue on with their delusion that they're just fine. And this is a problem for us. So what we have done in our department has been to focus specifically on, I think, the culture of making this problem better. And it all stems from something called achievement goal orientation. Any of you ever heard of achievement goal orientation? Good, I see some heads saying yeah. In general, when I ask applicants to our residency about this, they just look at me like, no, I don't know what that is. And it goes something like this. As a college student, you may not know a lot about achievement goal orientation because you go to the library, you do your work, you get your A. You come to the residency, things don't work like that. You can't get the needle where it's supposed to go, the patient doesn't respond to the medicine like you'd like them to, so there's lots of opportunities for setbacks or failure. That's how residency works, at least where I'm from. And I don't think we're lousy doctors, I think that's the nature of the game. Some things are really difficult. So what I need to know is, what is your response to difficulty or failure, negative feedback or so? And there's two really very different ways one can respond. And you can either have the goal, what's called a learning goal or learning orientation, or you can have something called a performance orientation. And I'm going to explain those words because they mean really different things. I'm going to give you some examples here. If you have a learning orientation, then this is going to be true. When you meet a setback or a difficulty, you have a singular goal. Your goal is to overcome the setback or difficulty that's in front of you. If I don't understand my physics problem, I'm going to talk to the teacher, read the book, check YouTube or whatever people do these days to figure out how to learn my physics. That's my goal, to overcome my difficulties with physics. So folks like this, when things go wrong, they do things like this. They change strategy. They believe that effort is called for, and they do not get bothered by exhibiting or having to put forth effort to solve their problem. That's okay with them. That's normal. So those are the two things they use. If you look at all Americans, last time they checked, about maybe 40%, plus or minus 5% of people really act this way in a sort of a common, natural way. This is very effective because when things go wrong, you engage and you try and triumph over whatever the trouble is. In contrast, there's this other thing called a performance orientation. It sounds good on the front of it, right? Performance orientation. That sounds good, especially in medicine. I'm performance oriented. But I want you to think of the word differently. Imagine somebody has had they've gone to Broadway and they've had their opening. The first thing they want to do is go open the newspaper the next day to see if their performance has been judged positively. So that's the way to think about a performance orientation. Your goal is to make sure that everyone thinks highly of you, that they think you're quite able, that you're getting positive accolades from folks. So this is what you want. You want to validate your ability, gain judgments that are favorable, and for heaven's sakes, the last thing in the world that you want is for people to think badly of you. That's the worst thing to happen to you. So for folks who have this strong goal orientation, when things go wrong for them and they can't do the physics problem, they're very likely to conclude, oh, I don't have this ability. I can't do physics. I'm not made that way. They don't think, oh, gee, I need to try harder, ask some questions, go back to the library, ask my friends, take a remedial course. That would never occur to a person like this. So these set up very different ways of addressing setback. So to give you an example of what these people, how they respond, these are the ways that someone with a learning orientation might respond. And these are people who have a performance orientation, and how they might respond to the question of what floats their boat. Question?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
When you said 40% of the country was like the top in 60, is that true also of the kinds of people who turn up at Harvard University and Harvard Medical School?
That's a great, great question. It's a lot of fun to know that. I can tell you this. In health professions, they looked at this in the maybe 80s or so, and they were enriched for learning-oriented people. That was above these numbers, and that was down in the South. When I ask, I've actually gotten this, I've given clickers to the internal medicine people at MGH, and I've had 150 of them all answer these questions. They're strongly learning-oriented. I'm impressed at the internal medicine doctors in training at the MGH are strongly learning-oriented. Not all of them, though, and in my department, there's a split. And the faculty will self-identify. They see this and they go, oh, I know what I am. And it can be quite clear for folks. So the difference and the important thing here is when things are going well, you can forget about everything I've said. It is irrelevant. If you're making your A's and you're doing well, this is actually not important. But because of the nature of what we do, things go wrong kind of every day, if not every week. They do. So in order to deal with that kind of setback and to address it effectively, I need them to have a learning orientation because the evidence is overwhelming that people with a learning orientation respond much more functionally to these setbacks and troubles. And that's what I need out of these learners. So this is an example of what students in college, and they're a college like Harvard, it's called Cornell, and this is what they did. They took these college kids who were taking a science class, they gave them their science test, and they gave them bogus feedback and evaluation. They said, you guys didn't do so well. Look at this, you did badly on your science test. And then they measured the goal orientation of the students. And those who were strongly learning-oriented are shown here. Those who are strongly performance-oriented are shown there. You can see that the people who have a strong learning orientation responded in ways that are much more functional to getting a bad grade. They wanted to get better. They wanted to step into it and fix this problem. They were willing to put in time and effort, and they would actually go so far as to plan to make that better. The people who are performance-oriented said, nah, you know, no thanks. And they're unmotivated, actually turned off to science by that kind of a thing. And then time and effort, I think we'll just quit. I mean, that's what that looks like. Bringing it closer to the medical doctors, this is a study that was out of Europe for medical trainees, residents. And they did the same thing. They learned by doing these pretty simple questionnaires whether the trainees were strongly learning-oriented or strongly performance-oriented. And then they asked them about their interest in receiving feedback on how they were performing. And you can see here that residents who were strongly performance-oriented positively perceived the concept and the process of feedback as costly. They saw it as a not good thing. Because feedback is telling you that what you're doing isn't okay. That's not what a performance-oriented person wants to hear. A learning-oriented person, on the other hand, sees this positive correlation, means they see benefits and they don't see costs. So they see the upside because if you want to get better and that's your goal, feedback is the ticket to getting better because it helps guide your change in behavior or what you do. So it's actually useful to you. And the harmful side, you don't pick that up. And this is a cute quote by Galbraith that I can't help but show you because this is what most of my trainees do. Very busy on the proof. So what I want to show you is this concept of being less defensive and interpreting or construing. I think that might be the right word, construing a setback in a more favorable way. And I'll show you how a group of people can be made to be more accepting of this. So the background of this study I'm going to show you is college students. I can't recall the university. And this is a randomized trial. So it's cause and effect. You can actually say that. It's not just associative. And so here are your students right here. I've made different kinds of colored people. I've made the yellow or the green ones. Those are people who are learning-oriented. And the red ones are performance-oriented. And they're just regular people. And they're randomized to these two groups. That's all your college students. And then one group is going to read a prime. It's about IQ. And it's about being able to improve your IQ through effort and study and so on. So sort of casting IQ with the framework of a learning-oriented approach. This group here is essentially the same kids, for lack of a better term, who read the exact same passage, but where the words have been changed to frame it in a performance-oriented fashion. So when you read the two texts, they're very similar except for the word choicing that casts it in an effort and strategy approach versus an ability approach. They just read this. That's called the baseline reading test. There's nothing more fancy than that going on. Then they take what they've ostensibly come to the laboratory for, and that is the speed reading test. This is just the gimmick to do the baseline reading test. Before you do a speed reading test, you want the baseline reading test. So the kids don't know why they're taking it, but that's what's happened. And this speed reading test is really difficult. And then they tell all of the students, no matter who they were, they told them, you know, you got in the 37th percentile. And most college students, that's a big ding. 37th percentile is below average. They all think they're above average, so this hurts. This is a distinct setback. So now comes the fun part. These two groups of people are going to be asked to choose 3 of 8 samples that they get to know the strategy of. So they've got 1 through 8 are the students. And you can see that students 1 through 8 have received very high scores on this test to really low scores on this test. And each of these students has described what they've done to achieve their level of performance. And you, as the person over here who's just bombed the test, this is where you've performed, that's the marker for where you performed, you get to choose which 3 you want. I showed my wife that she thought this was the stupidest thing in the world. And you'll see why in a second. So the question is, who chose what? Firstly, the performance-oriented kids, which is, they're actually all the same people. They just read the performance-oriented prime. When you ask them, who do you want to know, whose strategy would you like to study and learn about? Look who they choose. They choose other people like them who bomb the test. Do you think you're going to get better at the test if you study the techniques of those also who bomb the test? I doubt it, because you're asking, this is called a downward comparison. You sort of look around and go, you bombed the test? Why'd you bomb the test? We all bombed the test. So it's not a strategy to get better. In contrast, look at what the students who were primed with the learning orientation did. They made an upward comparison. They looked up and said, these kids did better than me. What did they do differently than me? And so that's actually a useful strategy. Anyone who plays sports will know what this is and what this feels like. People almost always play better when they play up, and this is called playing up. So you're sort of ripping off the strategies of those who outperform you because they've got game on you. This is a useful thing to do. And then, so that's sort of, if you're the learner, what's the perspective? And then if you want to make a culture, I think you need to both have the learners try and frame all of their feedback with a learning orientation, and at the same time, you'd like your faculty to deliver the feedback to them with the same attitude and construal. So if you're a faculty member and you're construing your feedback with a learning orientation, that means your singular goal is to help and improve the performance of the learner. And that sort of conditions how you say things, what you say, and so on. If, on the other hand, you're going to address the learner and you're a performance-oriented faculty member, you're going to want to show them that they don't know what they're doing, they're not as smart as the other kids, and so on and so on. That does not help people get better at what they do. So it goes something like this. If something goes wrong, if you're a learning-oriented faculty member, you might say, well, let me show you what I would do differently. Why don't you try this? Let me give you a paper that shows you how things get better if you do X, Y, and Z. So it's a purposeful improvement approach. Whereas the other one, you might say something like, gee whiz, don't you read enough? Where have you been all year? You're behind your peers or something. It doesn't help them get better whatsoever. And these are the things we try and do in our department to try and get our faculty to deliver feedback with this attitude and the residents to hear it in the same way. I don't think negative feedback is always fun. This slide, the next slide, is sort of an example of what it looks like. And I think this uncomfortable coupling of negative feedback and improvement is probably inescapable from what I can tell. And it looks like this. This is 2 groups of medical students who've been randomized to 2 groups, A or B. And they come into the laboratory, and they're going to learn to tie knots. So they're brand new at tying knots. They're students. They're not very good at this. So on the y-axis here, you can see they tie knots not too well. They get some learning. They practice a little bit. They get a lot better. And then they actually, at this point, are actually randomized to A or B. After a while of A, they perform this well. After a while of B, they perform this well. And when they're all done with this whole thing, they ask the students, hey, how'd you like A or how'd you like B? So firstly, they liked A better. Whatever A was, they like it better. But if you want them to tie better quality knots, you probably ought to choose B. So it turns out that A is compliments. It's what we in the medical profession do all the time. Good job, strong work, nice knot, good attaboy. And it's not effective at getting you better at what you do. Matter of fact, you can see here, compared to where they left off and what they got, just simply petting them on the head and telling them they're doing a good job does not help. B is actual feedback that's constructive and purposeful and designed to help them make better at what they're doing. So although it's helpful and makes them better, they don't like it as much. And I think this study is sort of a nod to the reality of negative feedback, where negative feedback is something not positive, that people don't dig it. And there you go. So your choice is happier or more pleasant or higher performance, and you make that call yourself. I would go for B, but that's me. Something else we try and do in our feedback program with our residents at the end of the day, during the day, I have long advocated that the resident who's working with the faculty one-on-one all day or one-on-two, so seeing a lot of the faculty, that they ask the faculty at the end of the day, hey, one thing I did well, one thing I should improve on. Turns out direct feedback like that, it doesn't work. Most faculty simply say, good job, you're doing really well, you come along nicely, and they walk out the door. So that is it seems intuitive enough that that ought to work, but it doesn't work well at all. And my residents tell me when they try this, the faculty just gives them this nonsense about, attaboy, you're doing a good job. So I think that's probably the mum effect at work when you ask somebody to tell you right to your face something, and they won't do it. So instead, I've got two more approaches that I've ripped off. They're not my idea. One I ripped off from a leadership book, and that's the feed forward, and the other one is, I don't know where I got it from, but I call it the oblique angle. That's when you don't ask, as the learner, you don't say, how did I do? You say, hey, if I called in sick today, how would you have done this case differently? So you're asking the faculty to talk about themselves. And that seems to be an easy thing for them to do. So that they just go on and on. The key is that the resident has to perceive any gap between what was done and what the faculty said they would do differently as the feedback. So you have to infer the feedback. If they said I would have done this differently, oh, I should have done that. That you have to have that insight and pick that up. And the feed forward looks like this. It's very straightforward. If we had to take care of Mrs. Jones again next week, how would we do it differently? And then you let the faculty talk again about looking forward into the future. You're not talking about that person, which provokes, I think, the mum effect. I think this is an opportunity for them to speak in a far more open fashion without feeling like they're dinging the person. And this seems to work pretty well for our residents. They get some return on investment for this effort. And then upgrading it one more notch to junior faculty. These are junior doctors writing to their senior doctor mentors. And this paper is really about getting mentorship and advice from a more senior doctor. So this is now in the I'm done training, I'm a board certified this or that. And this is what the faculty say about their feedback from their more senior doctors. And if you read this, it has a lot of the ingredients of the things you would want as a learner from college up. We want critical eyes. We want constructive feedback to improve, thoughtful, focused comments, none of this generic praise nonsense. They want specificity, and they want stuff on how to improve. They don't want the attaboy. And nothing wrong with an attaboy, but that's not going to get you where you want to go. So this is kind of fun, and I don't know what your current framework is on praise feedback. This stands to reason that it would be good, and one of my colleagues loves to pull a chain of the stands to reason argument. Many things that stand to reason aren't so. So I think many of our faculty think that positive praise is just the best thing you want to give somebody. It's a really great thing. I will not show you the studies of this, but praise feedback can be disabling. It actually can be counterproductive and can reduce performance, which is almost paradoxical. These studies first came out of work with children in, I think, the first grade or so. I forget, maybe they were 8 years old or something, 5th grade. Anyways, however old they were kids. And they randomized the kids, and they gave them, you did good on this, you did well on this test because you are so smart. That's a performance-oriented type feedback. Those kids then, when put into a challenging circumstance, tanked. If you told the kid you did well because you tried hard, you put in a lot of effort, and then you gave that kid a challenge, they rose to the occasion. So I think praise feedback is something that can be problematic. So I counsel our faculty, you can throw some praise at them, but be very careful with it. This is performance-oriented feedback. You're so smart, you're a brain, or something like that that's inherent to the person. There's only one way to go if you're really great, and that would be down. This is more effortful and purposeful performance or learning-oriented feedback, which is what I try and counsel our faculty to write to the residents. So I think disabling feedback is this positive generic praise like, oh, you're so smart, you're such a great doctor. Not helpful stuff. And then this would probably come, I was going to eye-clicker this, but for time decided to throw it out. This will probably surprise you. When should you give feedback? And there's two components to this. And when we are doing procedures in medicine, and you're new to the game, so you've done it for less than 5 years, that's new. And you're putting a needle, 3 inches into the back of someone right near their spine, and if you blow it, something bad's going to happen. Your entire working memory capacity is locked on that task. Everything about your brain is right there. So when the faculty's over there giving you feedback, oh, put the needle here, oh, do this, stop that, you don't listen to it. You don't process it because your working memory capacity is overly full with what you're currently doing. So although it sounds great to give what's called concurrent feedback at the time of the event while it's happening, it actually is counterproductive. And studies showing randomization to concurrent versus terminal, or at the end of the procedure, terminal is distinctly better, and there are a number of reasons for that. If we think the patient might be in danger by not giving the feedback, then we're best off to stop the procedure, disengage from the task, give the feedback once they can process it with their working memory capacity, then turn their attention back to the procedure. Because if they're engaged, everything you say is going to hit them in the head and fall on the ground. And then you'll be all frustrated because you think they're deaf. And this paper here is fun. This is actually a college students looking to do computer problem solving, and they're getting, while they're trying to solve the problem, they're getting input and feedback, and it's actually disruptive to their actual performance. So that's a nice example of cognitive overload. So parsing out how much you give people feedback and when you give it is important. And then finally, there's this concept here called bracing, which is kind of a neat concept. These are students in college who've been randomized to a couple different groups, and it's pretty straightforward. They're going to have to give a presentation to their peers, just like this, and the peers are going to grade them. The only thing that's changing along this axis is when that person is going to get the feedback. So if they're going to give their talk and right away get feedback at time 0, then they underestimate how well they're going to do. They think, oh, I'm not going to do very well. And then they overperform. This is their actual performance. So it's like they brace for the hit because they know it's coming. So they try harder to avoid the hit, and then they downgrade the expectations, so probably it's going to work out no matter what the feedback is. So this is a protective mechanism almost. And as time goes by, you can see that they start to think they're going to do great, and then they tank, which is much more normal for people. So this real proximity to feedback is called bracing because it makes you aware of your vulnerability, I think, and people will true up what they think is really going to get said to them right away. So lastly, before we turn it over to Joel, there's this paper. It's a pretty long paper, I think maybe 38 pages or something. But it's a very well-written, very scholarly paper on formative feedback, which is feedback specifically designed to help the individual get better at what they do. It's written for medical folks who are doing actions in practice, so sort of in a hospital setting or in a clinic setting. But it goes through the evidence for what we ought to do and why, what not to do and why, timing, and the learner themselves. And it has a very thorough discussion of all of this stuff that's, I think, quite helpful. It's a long paper. If anybody wants it, I'm happy to share it with you. It's like 5 megabytes or something, so I don't just give it out. So the other thing I want to mention is that feedback does work. It is not a lost hope or a lost cause. All things considered over time, feedback has an effect size of about 0.4 standard deviation. So over the course of time, feedback does improve performance. And this is an example of our faculty's teaching score. So this is 120 faculty, so a whole bunch of faculty over the course of, that is 10.5 years. Actually no, that's 5 years. That's 6 years right there total. And you can see with a time constant, it takes a long time for them to take the written feedback and change behavior and improve their performance. So it's a slow, arduous process. And I'm usually very forgiving of the time frame for which feedback works. And this is something we suffer with quite a lot. There's a great deal of worry about this for us. When I mean a great deal of worry, I mean a great deal of worry. Everybody thinks that if I mark the student down, that student's going to whack me. So there's this concern that what I call retaliation. And we have a unique circumstance, so I have to put in the caveat. We have bidirectionally confidential evaluations. Confidential means it's knowable, but not known, not told. So I can find out who evaluated who, but I don't tell anybody. Given that setup, I still have faculty who have these worries, and they're very significant worries. So I'm lucky I have data going both directions. I can actually check, and this is one example of the results for us. And what we have here is the harshness of the grader. This is a harsh grader. This is a very lenient grader. So these are the average score that this person gave to all residents was here. It's very lenient. On the y-axis here is the average teaching score received by the faculty from the residents. So this is the whole system, but I call this a macroscopic view. It's the average score given to all residents. The average teaching score received by that person is this. And you can see there's no relationship. With the setup we have, we don't suffer from retaliation at this macroscopic level. At a very focused dyadic level, that shows a very tiny, measurable, insignificant retaliation effect that numerically is inconsequential, but because I've got thousands and thousands of evaluations, I can measure it. But it's a very tiny little thing, and I'm going to hopefully write a paper about this because it's an ongoing worry by a lot of people. So I show you this one graph because it's sort of a summary of nothing interesting going on there. So I'll stop, take questions, and then Joel's got a presentation. Joel, if you want to fire up your presentation, if there's questions for now. I thought you'd get me when I was talking, but maybe I talked too fast. Yeah, please.
So early on, you showed like this really interesting study about students who think that they do well, and they're actually doing poorly, and you can't convince them otherwise.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you flip that, if you were to ask the teachers how well they're teaching, how well do teacher expectations
same way.
affect these
Oh, yeah. I very much expect so, yeah. When faculty get low teaching evaluations, the first thing they do is come in to tell me how wrong the students are in their evaluations. The first thing they do. How can this be? This can't be right. What's wrong with this? Certainly the math must be wrong. I get all manner of that. And thankfully, I've got, at this point, for our faculty, over 50,000 evaluations by our faculty. And our faculty, our residents are right when they evaluate faculty. When they say they're not teaching well, they're not teaching well. And the causes are very complicated. But there's something going on that needs fixing, almost always. Yeah?
I suspect that it's a challenge that we all experience, and we especially see it when we have students doing peer feedback. The term constructive feedback often means positive, that it's always positive, it's biased towards positive. That somehow constructive feedback has become a code word.
Interesting, yeah.
For positive feedback. So we will always encourage students that in group sort of feedback sessions, be constructive, and then all you hear are positive comments and nothing critical. So what would you advise is the best way to sort of shift that understanding?
Well, it's funny you say that because I see what you're saying and I get it. I don't use that word. I use the word developmental. The word developmental means to grow, means to get better at what you do. So I ask the faculty for developmental feedback. I ask the residents, and I don't say what kind of feedback. I'll say, I need you to tell the faculty what to do differently, what to start doing, stop doing, or change what they're doing to get them a little bit better. From your perspective, let's say you and I have an episode together. I just need to know from you what you think I need to do that would make it better next time, a little bit better. I don't need to, change my height or something, but something moderate. And over time, since we get a lot of data, that integrates into a pretty strong message. But the singular goal is always helping to grow a little bit. And it doesn't need to be a positive thing. It just needs to be a little something to grow. Yes?
Regarding praise, I'm wondering, I know we give feedback to faculties of the business school, and we will often combine opportunities and strengths. So sort of 3 strengths, 3 opportunities is the way we frame it. And I mean, we're very specific under the strengths as to what it is we're praising. So it's not some broad, you were really great in there, but actually on these particular dimensions, you may not be aware of it, that those were particularly effective. So that's great. It may be a more nuanced way of thinking about praise, but
I think you're right. If you can pin it down to an activity that is, the activity itself was done well, and not the person you're a great businessman or a great B student at HBS or whatever, that accomplishes the goal. People do want reward. They do want affirmation that what they're doing is working well for them. That's perfectly great to have that. That's a good thing. It's when you say, something about the person and you attribute their successes to their inherent being. That's where the trouble starts, from what I can tell from the reading I've done. Yes?
A little bit confused. So should we be giving A's for effort?
No, I don't think so. As a physician, it's not about effort. It's about outcome. If the patient is in trouble, that's not okay. I don't care how hard you work. I mean, it's nice you tried. And I might say, you know, your effort's fantastic. You're trying really well. But we need to change what we're doing because we're not getting to where we need to go.
We grade by performance.
I do. That's
Encourage effort.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's performance that I need out of them. I'm a physician. That's what the public expects. Yeah?
You talked about the time of feedback, which is kind of interesting. How to get involved in something and too busy with it and like me into it.
Yeah.
So it's not a good time to receive extra information. But many times I find it, if we leave it for a while, you come back, I'm sure you've heard this before,
Yeah.
people don't remember.
Yeah.
Well, it really hasn't, didn't work this way. This is your recollection versus mine. So how do you balance these two versus?
Yeah, so
It's difficult to take time out of time and say, stop this thing.
I agree. It's very hard. And I got to tell you, I forget all the time. It's really sad. I work with someone like, what happened today? So if I really am trying to help somebody, this is usually an iPhone, I send myself messages. And they're little tiny cryptic messages that I could print and give them to you. You wouldn't know what they meant because it's me talking to me. And they're little tiny things, and I know exactly what they mean when I see them. And that's I'm like, oh yeah, that. And then I can write some feedback that's on point and helpful. Because that helps my memory. Otherwise, I truly, totally forget sometimes. I'll let Joel.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Joel.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, Joel.
Can everyone hear me? Yes. Good. Thank you, Keith, very much. I've learned so much from Keith over many years of listening to him and dividing evaluation and feedback. And we spend a lot of effort in our program on feedback. The assignment, and you're going to hear a little bit about it right now, the assignment we were given was actually group feedback or team feedback. And I wasn't sure what that meant exactly. But Keith focused on the feedback piece of it, and I'm now going to focus on the team piece of it or the group piece of it. Okay? And what I'm going to do, we're going to go in a completely different direction. And as I said, I am a medicine residency director, and a lot of effort goes into how to provide good feedback, and a lot of effort goes into creating new sort of moments that can crystallize feedback. And so I'm going to give you one example, and this is a little bit of an unusual example, but hopefully it'll bring up some questions, maybe generate some ideas. So we've already talked about this. Challenges in the medical school are a little different than some of the other schools. The biggest one is it's in the context of direct patient care, and it's often critically ill patient care. So that's slightly different. It's a high-stake environment for our trainees, our medical students. High stake both because of the clinical outcome, these are people's lives and people's health, but also high stake because many of the students want to be residents, and they view their performance in these teams as their chance to either get into a residency or never ever have a chance to become one of Keith's residents, depending on how they do. So it's a very hierarchical environment with traditionally physicians' opinions being privileged over other team members, and medical students generally being at the very bottom, or at least feeling like they're at the bottom of the pyramid. Many different levels of learners and teachers in the same team together is a challenge. And more, we're moving away from individual decision-making to multidisciplinary collaborative teamwork. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. And this is true for many reasons, including with the duty hours regulations that I'm sure you've all read about. People are in and out of the hospital more. There's many more handoffs. And in outpatient, inpatient settings, every setting, we're moving away from individual learning to team learning. Okay, so I'm going to present you an example here of a team building activity we have that is a method of, partially at least, a big part of it is a method of feedback to learners on how to work better, more effectively as team members. And the work that I'm going to show you is many people have been involved in it, and I'm just presenting it, but I have not been the main leader. These are some, there's more names at the end. But so we have one specialized inpatient teaching service that we call our integrated teaching unit. It's essentially a patient laboratory where there are fewer, there's a higher teacher to learner ratio, there's a lower patient to practitioner ratio. It's a little bit slower pace, and we use it as an opportunity to pilot specific learning objectives, such as teamwork, for example. And as part of this ITU, it's called the Integrated Teaching Unit. It used to be called the Intensive Teaching Unit, but somehow patients didn't like it when they were in an intensive teaching unit, as you can understand. Within that, we have a multidisciplinary teamwork training curriculum. And the goal of the curriculum is to explore and provide feedback on team dynamics, communication styles, hierarchy, and interdisciplinary relationships. And there's 4 parts of that. And I'm only going to talk about one part today. There's an orientation to all of the learners in the first week of a 4-week rotation. There is a professional observer who observes the team as they're operating in the morning, as they're rounding, and provides them feedback. We have a team building exercise at the museum, which I'm going to tell you about. And then there are simulation exercises on cognitive decision making, again, including multidisciplinary, many members of the team, nurses, social workers, medical students, attending physicians, where we have a chance to explore in great depth how people are working together. So I'm going to tell you about this one, the team building night, okay? And again, it's a little different than what you've probably seen before. There's an educator, Gary Berg, says it's so precise, it is precisely because art is so richly complex that our possibilities from learning from it are endless, and that is what we have found. And we have what we call our multidisciplinary teamwork training and feedback session. So each team is observed by an arts educator in the hospital. And then the night comes along, they're freed up. We have other people in the hospital who cover their service, and the entire team, the medical student, the intern, the resident, the attending, the nurse, the social worker, the care coordinator, the physical therapist, they all go have dinner adjacent to the museum, and then they go to the museum for this exercise. And this is an example. And this happens to be a medical student and an intern and a resident and a nurse and et cetera. Sorry, someone's after me. They'll have to wait. There are 4 activities, and I'm just going to go through with you very briefly what the activities are. First one is an interpretive challenge. And this is borrowed from visual training strategies, which is a strategy developed actually at HGSE here at the Harvard by Abigail Husin, which asks, and it's based on, it's been studied in elementary school kids. And it turns out there's a lot of parallels between medical students and elementary school kids. And it relies on 3 probing questions. What's going on in this image? What do you see that makes you say that? And what else can you see? And so we start with a easily accessible piece of work. And we have the entire team look at it. This happens to be one we use frequently, Gauguin's Where Do We Come From? What Are We and Where Are We Going? It's a rich, wonderful piece if you haven't seen it at the MFA, I should say. We do this at the MFA, the Gardner, and the Harvard Art Museum. Unfortunately, they're closed right now. And this is an opportunity to sort of practice sharing, create an equal, safe playing field where people can start to abandon hierarchy and get used to listening carefully to each other. Second activity is a professional conversation, what's going on in this painting. And we pick artworks that specifically address hierarchy and team dynamics. So for example, this is one I like, Pan and Psyche. And just take a minute and look at that piece of artwork. And imagine that you're a medical student or a nurse or a attending or a social worker. And depending on what perspective you're coming from, you can imagine the observations are very, very different. And it is so enlightening to watch the medical student look at the nurse or vice versa and start to understand their perspectives. So this is a nice one. And then the third activity is actually a team work activity where they're assigned a topic they have to do together. And it might be to write a poem, or to reenact a painting, something that they have to work together. In this particular example I've given you, we divided them into small groups. Who is this person? I'm going to show you a painting. And what do you imagine about their life? And this is the one we might use. And we have half the people in the group say, you are the patient's family member. What do you want the healthcare providers to know about your family member? And the other half is, you are this person's healthcare provider. What do you want the family to know about it? And they each come up with a single one-sentence reflection, share them, build them together, and then cut them into pieces and make them into a poem. And here they are doing that on the ground with a painting. And then the last activity is what we call Interpretive Challenge Revisited, and this is a completely inaccessible piece of artwork, something that defies interpretation or resists interpretation. And this is one that I like by Rachel Harrison, I'm with Stupid, it's called. Take a look at that. Okay, and here's our team right here. This is the attending. This is the different members of the team are around it, wandering around it, and you're asked, what does this mean to you? And the beauty is here, there's absolutely no right answer, of course. And it calls on people to work as a team, to work together as a team. And then after this exercise, the expert who's either, we actually have had someone from the business school do this for us, which was amazing. They gave us the business perspective. We've had usually art educators do it, is observation on the team dynamics. So this is somebody who's been and watched the team in rounds, and then watched them operate in the museum, and then gives them feedback, direct feedback, based on those as to their how their dynamic style, what they are like as a team, and how they can improve. And they do it both independently, in other words, on each particular activity, but then in comparison, how are you different in the museum than you were on the wards with the patients? And then we ask each participant to have a self-reflection. What did you notice about the team based on this activity? And here's an example. Of course, we pick out the good examples. There it is. But they're very positive, as you can imagine. And I end with this. The power of the third thing allows us to approach the truth on a slant. That somehow, especially in a hierarchical, high-pressure, clinical environment, it's very hard to get people to look critically at themselves and as a team. And if you can bring them out of that environment, it's a great opportunity to change that dynamic. And this is Parker Palmer. Mediated by a third thing, truth can emerge from and return to our awareness at whatever pace and depth we are able to handle. So I would say the types of things that we can observe and comment on and absorb in the art museum are very different than the things we can see in the clinical environment, which is a big challenge for us. And that is it that I have to say, and these are many of my collaborators. There's many more as well. So I hope this is kind of out of the box example, but I was encouraged to, to try and do that as a way to focus on the group, giving feedback to a group. And I'm happy to take questions if there are any. Yes?
The cost of doing it, either financial or otherwise, would be much less if you don't have to get that expert observer. Have you tried it without? Was the team just debriefing themselves, and if so, what happened?
Well, so it's actually fairly inexpensive. The major cost is either hiring a moonlighter to cover the service while everybody goes to the museum. That's the major cost. Second major cost is actually the dinner, because they like to go for a dinner. We've had various people as the observers, and it's usually the arts educators, and they. This is one of many programs where we use it at the Art Museum. And so we have contractual relations with them. So it turns out it's not as much as you would think. But the question is, what do they add to the process? They add a huge amount to the process because I think they can get people involved in metacognition and stepping back from their lives and saying, what does this all mean? And I think you really need someone to do that. My sense is everyone individually learns from the experience, but it congeals with this broader feedback. Yes?
So So along those lines, I'm just so curious about what kind of rubric is in the head of the arts educators. Are they particularly looking for issues of hierarchy or sharing airtime? And do the people being observed have any sense of what's been looked for either before, during, or after the process?
They're looking at different arts educators do it differently, and they meet with me regularly for me to give them a sense. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, we have an orientation, and so if there's a particular problem that's been identified, we might have them focus on that, like you know, tension or communication. But I would say their charge is the very broad definition of teamwork, how they work as a team and how they can work more effectively as a team.
Must have in their head some idea of what good, effective teams do.
Well, before we started this, we designed it, we set up a curriculum, we set up the goals, and they have a list of what our goals are in terms of team functioning. And I suppose they fall back on that to some degree. As I mentioned, we had a volunteer from the business school do this for us for a while. He was actually married to one of our house staff, so he volunteered. And his approach was much more on management and efficiency and operational issues. And the arts educators were, I think, are more focused on hierarchy and communication and respect, things like that. Yes?
Are those the same people who are observing the group in the hospital?
Yes, same at the museum event as well. So they do it, usually it's a Wednesday morning they round with the team, and then Thursday night they go to the museum. Yes?
In terms of hierarchy, is your goal to break down and get rid of the hierarchy and have that continue on the wards, or do you want the team to just work well within the hierarchy?
Yeah, well, I think there's the reality and there's the goal. The reality is hierarchy will exist. You can't change, you know, I think sometime past kindergarten you can't change those sorts of habits and for some people. But there are many studies, I didn't go into it, that show that hierarchy is actually a direct contributor to poor patient care because people don't express their opinion honestly. And it leads to inefficiencies and bad patient care. So our goal is to eliminate hierarchy. And everyone recognize their role, not abandon their role, but work harmoniously. Yes?
Just curious to try to connect this dot with the earlier dot. Yeah. Has there been any effort to try to provide, whether it's individual team members providing each other feedback or the outside expert providing feedback in learning orientation kinds of ways as opposed to performance orientation kinds of ways, to see if that has some sort of a reinforcing effect over time in performance?
That's a great question. It's a great question. The it's an ongoing process to evaluate it, and we have various metrics by which we are evaluating. A lot of them are qualitative assessments, and we have a lot of people's descriptions of how they felt it changed. So the answer is I don't know I don't know that, and we're also trying to look at some quantitative metrics. So for example, the speed of rounds, does rounds speed up the day afterwards? The number of pages people get, are they communicating more effectively so they don't have to page each other later? Those are the types of metrics we're looking at. Yes?
I'm curious for the distinction between self-assessment as assessing one's self on the team versus assessing one's peers on the team. And so it may go a little bit to your question you just asked. It seems like the first presentation, you're saying your own ability to self-assess may be limited or problematic, but I'm curious as to the ability for individuals on the team to assess their peers and perhaps provide feedback to their peers as part of this. Is that included in the debrief stage?
Yeah. Well, we focus, that's I can't answer that directly, but what I can say is in this particular activity, we focus on feedback to the team's function, not individual members of the team. But as part of that, invariably and inevitably, people do recognize their own bad behaviors. But it's not done in a direct way. And when we ask them to self-assess, they're self-assessing their whole team, how their team functions, not how they as individuals function. And we don't ask them to point fingers at who's the stomper and the screamer, although probably everybody knows. The advantage that the arts educators and the business people have is that they can really step back and take personalities out of it. And the types of feedback that are the most useful is, have you ever noticed that when so-and-so starts talking, you walk away, or you turn away, or you answer your pages? Things like that are extremely valuable contributions. Yes?
Have you ever thought about trying to make it self-sustaining, where people who have gone through this become the observers and somehow learn to give that kind of feedback as opposed to constantly going to these outside people? Because I would imagine physicians who have gone through this probably have a way of observing what's going on around where they understand the substance of what's going on in a very different kind of way than somebody.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We've had residents who have been very moved by the experience and have come back to sort of help us with curriculum and participated. But the problem is then they become fellows and they become attendings and they disappear. And the arts educators, I have to put a pitch out for them. They are amazing. They're really fantastic. They teach people about artwork. They teach people how to think. And I'm always surprised by their consistently useful feedback. But I think your point is a great point, and I might think about how we can do that better.
I feel obligated
Yeah.
to call time.
Thank you. I'm glad you did. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this will be, for better or worse, a sharp change of gears from medicine to law. I must say, actually, I was fascinated by this because my younger daughter is a medical student, third-year medical student, just about to enter one of your terrains, and so it's just intriguing. Traditional legal education has long been criticized for having poor feedback systems. And to a large extent, the criticism is deserved. So the primary way in which we in the law school provide visible traditional feedback is a grade on a final exam. Students go all the way through the course and without any assessment of their abilities, and at the very end they take an exam and then they receive a grade. And once upon a time, when I first started teaching here, the grade was reasonably finely crafted to provide at least an assessment of where they fell hierarchically. Now it's just an honors or a pass. So terrible feedback. There is an exception in legal education. The exception is clinical education, which is growing fairly fast, that provides much more direct responses, not surprisingly, because it involves engagement with our version of patients, and so opportunities for the sort of feedback that Keith, you were primarily focused on, arise, and the clinical teachers are concerned with many of the same techniques. But I'm actually not going to deal with that here. I'm not a clinical teacher. I'll instead talk about traditional legal education. There is a dimension of traditional legal education or semi-traditional legal education which might be thought of as a hidden source of feedback, which is that the Socratic method is a technique for teaching through constant engagement with students, which can, isn't always, deployed in a fashion so as to give them reactions on the spot. Now, intriguingly, I'm not sure whether this is during or terminal. We'll find out. That was an interesting slide. So what I'm going to discuss here is how this technique, the Socratic method, or a variant of the Socratic method, might be adapted in an online environment. So I teach a course called Copyright X under the auspices of Harvard X, Rob's venture. It's not a MOOC, however. It isn't a massive open online course. It is a limited enrollment online course. And one of the main reasons why I've been committed for the 2 years in which I've been teaching it to this particular format is because I wanted to continue to deploy in an online environment the kind of direct engagement that law schools are, at least in theory, in a position to offer. So here's what I hope to do in our 45 minutes is I'm going to briefly describe to you the course, and then we are going to explore 2 dimensions of it. So I'm going to act for you with your aid a Socratic discussion of a particular case study. And then I'm going to show you a film, which is a screenshot of one of my teaching fellows teaching online, using a variant of this technique through a interface. And if all goes well, there will be an opportunity at the end to discuss whether this is a promising or not promising pedagogic experiment. So the course this year has 3 layers. First layer is a traditional course at Harvard Law School on copyright law, has 94 students. I've never taught in this room because my courses are too big. It's unfortunate because actually acoustics are great, and second layer is the online layer. There are 525 students in 72 countries. The reason there are 525 is because I limit the number of students that I accept through application process to 25 times the number of teaching fellows who volunteer from Harvard Law School or some other sectors of the university to teach the courses. Pick the number 25 because a common, I think, rule of thumb in the educational literature is that a discussion group of about 15 is optimal. So I admit 25 to each section, figuring that there will be some attrition. And as you'll see in a minute, I completely guessed the first year, the attrition would be about 40%, and turned out to be, that was right. So we end up with 15, more or less, in each of these sections. In addition, this year there are 10 satellite courses which employ all of my materials, including the 12 recorded lectures accompanying the course, but are taught by copyright teachers in other countries. With some variants, some important variants. So most importantly, they use my own reading materials, but leave in them with reading materials that highlight the distinctive characteristics of copyright law in their own countries. And the exams that they give at the end of the course may be somewhat different. 6 of the satellite courses are in sub-Saharan Africa, which is great from my standpoint because that's the zone where the coverage of the online course is the weakest. And the reason it's the weakest is because the connectivity that's necessary to sustain genuine engagement in sub-Saharan Africa, with the exception of South Africa, is terrible. So the satellites are different from the online courses in one crucial respect, which is they meet in real space once a week to discuss the materials that they have watched online. What happens if they can't get the lectures online, if they can't stream them? Well, we, this year, used very old technology here, took the 12 recorded lectures, copied them onto thumb drives, and mailed them to the cities in Africa where they were plugged into laptops and watched. The weekly schedule. So here's how it unfolds. Before Monday morning, the Harvard Law School students have to watch a 80-minute recorded lecture each week by me. Then they meet in a classroom more or less like this to have a discussion of the general sort we're going to have in a minute, based on case studies. Then on Wednesday, I meet with my teaching fellows, the 21 teaching fellows, to talk about pedagogy and talk about the case studies they might be teaching that particular week. They have a lot of autonomy in picking out of the basket of now 62 case studies which ones they want to employ. Occasionally on Wednesdays, there's, however, a special event. 4 times during the semester, we have an outside speaker who's an expert in some dimension of copyright come. By coincidence, today was one of those outside events, and Professor Ruth Okediji from the University of Minnesota an expert in international intellectual property law, gave the event this morning. The difference between the regular classes and the special events is the regular classes have no online component. They are just the members of the course in the room, whereas a special event is webcast to the world, and the online students and the participants in the satellites not just can watch it, but they can submit questions. And indeed, today, several questions were coming from Brazil, Nigeria, Tanzania, to Ruth. She brilliantly answered them. Okay, so that's the schedule for the Harvard Law School students. The online students watch the same recorded lecture. They participate, as I just indicated, in the same event when there is one. And then between Thursday and Sunday, at different times, to enable people around the world to participate, they have a seminar, a synchronous online seminar, in which they discuss the same case studies that I've used in class. Roughly half of the 21 teaching fellows are doing the medical school thing. They learn it on Monday and they teach it on Friday. The satellites work more or less the same way. They watch the same recorded lecture, they participate or have the option to participate in the same event, and they have, as I say a minute ago, real space discussions, typically on Saturdays. In addition, there is an online discussion forum, an asynchronous discussion system. Each of the sections has its own, what we call garden, a closed, moderated space in which they can talk with their fellow students and their teacher, me, or teaching fellows. And then all of the students, both law students and all the participants in the larger universe, participate in what's called the forest, unmoderated, wild, unpredictable, but it engages cross-disciplinary, cross-age, cross-cultural conversations. So here's some data on the first year. These are the participation rates over time. As you can see, we began with approximately 500 students. It fell off sharply in the second week, but then stayed, you know, more or less stable. Week number 8 turned out to be a combination of Easter and Carnival. And by the end, we had slightly more than half of the participants attending the last lecture. 307 of the original 500 passed the participation requirement. You were allowed to miss a certain number. 247, basically half, took the final exam, which was a 24-hour exam. You're supposed to be able to finish it in 8 hours. Turns out that was a mistake on my part. Many of them worked much longer than that. And then those exams were graded partly by my teaching fellows, and then I reviewed the assessment of the exams close to the pass-fail line, and 80% passed the final exam. So demographic breakdown, half were from the United States, half were from outside the United States. These are their age ranges, and it turns out participation rates, retention rates are about the same for each age bracket, except the youngest folks dropped off at a little bit higher rate. This is educational attainment. Interestingly, it turned out that the lawyers who took the course, we biased against lawyers. Most of the students were artists, authors, filmmakers, musicians, photographers, software designers, librarians, government officials, journalists, and we only accepted 30 lawyers. The lawyers only passed at the same rate that the other people did. And the passage rate of people in the United States and outside the United States was about the same, 80% in each instance. Okay, so what we're going to do in here is first try a case study of the sort that is taught in real space with the Harvard Law School students. So I've picked one that doesn't require a significant amount of legal knowledge. It's okay, I can pass it on. So this is one that is discussed in the second week of the course, right after the students have watched a lecture about intellectual property theory, and it asks a straight normative question, not one about what the law is. So please take a few minutes, read it over, and then I'm going to ask you questions about it. Catherine. Who should have what rights and obligations out of this set of parties?
I would say that the rights to the redone picture, someone should sort of take a picture of the Jimenez piece, and he can have rights to that, but
He
should
being-
restore it. He meaning the heirs.
The heirs.
Sorry. No, Jimenez can have rights to what he did as the well-meaning vandalism.
Okay, so she.
It's a she, oh, sorry.
She's the 80-year-old
Oh,
woman. who-
okay.
Yes, okay,
Yes.
so she should have a rights to what?
To the work that she did in trying to restore the meaning.
Okay, so it's attached to the wall of the church.
But I'm saying take a picture of it so that she can have rights to that piece,
Uh-huh.
and then restore it back to what it was.
Uh-huh, okay. So what will she, Jimenez, do with the photo of the altered version? She now has this photo in her hand. What's she going to do with it?
She can claim it as her own work.
This is my photo. Yeah. Now, you understand that she's asked for money here. The case study indicates, because accurately, as of the time it was written, is 2,000 euros had been raised. By the time the dispute comes to a head, it's 53,000 euros. She wants it. Does she get it?
No,
Why?
because she wasn't authorized to do the, oh wait, she was.
Yeah.
Okay. The priest said she was allowed to do it.
Seems to be, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I take it you think that's critical. If she,
No, was it a work for hire kind of thing where they give permission, sort of seeming permission to her to do this work, but there was no contract around what if there was some unforeseen thing that came out of it?
well, Todd is the expert in contract law, but the answer is most likely to be no. There's, at best, a license to engage in certain behavior, permission given by the priest. But there's nothing like an employment relationship. There's also a technical doctrine in copyright law that offers an alternative route to work for hire status, as you probably know, that involves independent contractors that fit within a list of 9 special categories. But even that would require, in the United States, if it happened, the specification of the term work for a hire and a signature. So no, there's no employment relationship here, but there is permission, we think. So now back to the money. 53,000 euros? Who gets it?
I'm struggling because my gut tells me that was just a random thing that this got famous and that Cecilia should not benefit from it, but I'm having trouble forming an argument about why anyone should get the money.
So tacitly, you may be invoking one of the 4 theories of intellectual property and copyright in particular, which is a Lockean, originally Lockean argument that just as is in the case of rights to real property, dirt, land, the origin of entitlements lies in labor upon a thing not owned, which would then make permission relevant, although maybe not sufficient. And labor upon an unowned object that generates material that may or may not be beneficial to the public at large gives rise to a natural property right in the thing, which the state has an obligation to respect, that can then get passed down to successors in interest. So you could take that argument and drop it into this context, and one of its implications would then explain your hesitation, which is, this is just luck. She wasn't working hard to create something valuable. This was not what she intended. Is that right?
Yes, the intent is mattering a lot to me, and I'm trying to figure out why.
Okay, great. Patrick, what do you think? Do you agree with Catherine concerning the proper resolution of this multi-corner dispute? That, in particular, what she's argued for is the painting should be restored. There should be a photograph taken of the altered version, which is given to Jimenez, the restorer, putative restorer. And we haven't yet determined what's going to become of the 53,000 euros. Presumably, there are not going to be more euros after this, because it's going to be restored to its original dull, unimportant version. So it's just a pot of 53,000 euros, and we haven't figured out quite what to do with it yet, but not Jimenez because she was just lucky. So what do you think?
So I completely agree with that. My argument, I guess, would hinge on who owns the image. So was it painted for the church? The church has the right to that image, has the right to degrade that image in any way they choose, or does the original artist still retain an unchanged right to that image? I don't know the answer to that, but I would feel like if the church sort of bought this artwork to put up, they should have an entitlement to use the fees.
Okay, so I'm going to encourage you to just forget about what Spanish law is on this issue. And what we're engaged in here is a straight normative discussion in which, drawing upon some of these theories, but many of which you're probably familiar with in other settings, we're trying to figure out what ought to be the outcome of this dispute, and then we can try to align the law or align a private deal to match that. So that suggests a variant of where you began. The variant is not what a Spanish law provides vis-a-vis ownership, but in a more natural justice, fairness, or conceivably utilitarian vein, who should be the owner of the object. And now the object, so the object being the paint applied to the wall. Is that what the ownership of which we're concerned?
No, it's the work itself.
Not
paint, so it's the artistic use of paint, which is the object.
Great. So here is Martinez. He, some time ago, before he died, on vacation in this town that he really liked, he applied some paint to the wall. Presumably then, or at least a plausible explanation, would then be the paint belongs to the church. There's a tacit conferring upon the church of the paint. But the work, separate from the paint, belongs to, or ought to belong to? Still to the artist. To the artist, Martinez. Okay, so he dies. Now it belongs to his? Yeah, his heirs. Great. Okay, so his heirs now own the work. Great. And that means then you would, by a different route, agree with Catherine that it should be restored? That's what they want.
I don't know. I mean, in my gut said yes. You don't want the hairy monkey in a tunic. I'm not entirely sure if there was permission granted by.
Wait a minute. Why don't you want a hairy monkey in a tunic on the wall?
My gut tells me that there is more value in the original artwork, but there's clearly a
More
monetary
value measured by, yeah.
new artwork.
Right. Nobody's going to the town looking at this thing. Now they flock to the town. Yeah, the local airlines, Ryanair, created special flights to Borja to draw the people in. And then there are memes all over the world. Now they're altered versions of the Mona Lisa. They're altered versions of the Last Supper. Why should we restore it? It's a terrible idea to restore it. It's a contribution to public welfare.
It wasn't a justified contribution. If I were to have an image of Katz and someone else made a change to it without my permission, and put it out there and claim that it was their own, then I've lost on that.
Yes. Who here is from Europe? What's the right answer here? Federico.
As far as I'm concerned, no one has any right except the church who owns the wall, and it's there. They can decide whether they want to keep it like this. They can restore it back. Is the decision of the church. Unless in Italy, if the good, the painting, is protected by what also Dependant as an artistic good, then the use is restricted.
Yes.
So
and it's very sharply restricted, right? No modification.
Then you get in serious trouble. If you do something like that to a restricted painting, then both the church and the restorer are both in trouble.
And why wouldn't this painting automatically qualify for what you're entirely right is the enhanced protective shield that a European...
It doesn't look very good, so I would not... I mean, in Italy or in Spain, there are many artifacts that deserve to be protected. This one is not one of them.
Yes. The American analog to this, in case you're curious, in the Visual Artists' Rights Act only extends protection to works of recognized stature, although we have much more clumsy registration systems here to identify such things. Now, let's assume just for the moment that it were a better painting and you're going to drape it with this strong set of constraints on modification, constraints that are ordinarily thought to be rooted in a personality theory of property and a personhood theory of intellectual property in particular, not an accident that's Kant and Hegel over here, heavily influenced in the continental tradition. So let's assume, against this theoretical backdrop, that it were a good painting. Originally, right, okay. So now it has been, within this discourse, defaced. What are you going to do?
First of all, I don't think that the heirs of the painter has any right whatsoever.
Okay, they don't get it. No rights, no rights to the, not even the photo that Catherine.
Opéra de Paris, we are not paying a royalty to the heirs of Chagall who painted the wall.
Yeah, okay.
So that's our thing. I'm sorry,
no photo,
they are devastated,
no
but we don't care. The family can be, the heirs can be devastated, but I don't think they care about that. Now the problem is
who's
that
we here? Who's the we that don't care about the heirs?
The community, the society, the law system.
Okay, all right. So who do we care about?
I think the community does care if the painting was considered valuable and hence protected.
Okay, counterfactually, yes. Uh-huh.
So we do hold the church responsible if they allowed disfiguring it, and if they gave a delicate job to somebody who was not qualified and allowed that person to destroy it.
So hold them responsible. Okay, so now there are two options, two remedial options here. Somebody's going to pay somebody money. Often when somebody's committed a wrong, they have to pay money to the person they have wronged. Okay, and then there's injunctive relief. Catherine was tacitly invoking injunctive relief. She was saying, restore the painting. It should be a person from the art department in the University of Valencia has volunteered to do it. Somebody could be hired to paint it. Okay, so is that what you mean? Hold.
The church decides. Okay, two things. If the church decides that the painting should go back to its original form.
Yeah, why do we let the church decide?
But if we decide that the church is the owner of the building and therefore of the painting, it's the church who...
But I thought it was we, the public at large.
Unless we have decided that it's protected, that it's valuable, and it's in the list of the protected things, then it's a different thing.
Okay, good.
If it's in the list of the protected things, then there is a law enforcement for that. I mean, you just go after whoever has broken the law by destroying the painting or seriously damaging it.
So, and that's now who? Jimenez or the church? Who's the person who's now done wrong?
Well, in Italy it would be the Superintendenza. It's a government-owned institution that looks after the...
They're the ones who decide what's worthy of protection.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So there's a list, and you cannot...
But who is now committed a wrong? So we're assuming that this painting is on the list. So to be specific here, let's imagine that it is not ecce homo of the sort we just saw, but it's Caravaggio's version, okay?
If a Caravaggio that is in San Luigi de Francesi in Rome gets the church allows a lousy restorer
It's been defaced, okay.
Absolutely. Then the church is responsible to the Superintendenza, and the restorer is responsible to the church and the Superintendenza. I'm pretty sure.
And the remedy then would be to force the church to pay the painter from the University of Valencia to restore it, and the money would come out of the pocket of the church to do this, because they're the wrongdoer here?
If we're talking about Caravaggio, if we're talking about Caravaggio, definitely yes.
Okay.
Definitely yes.
Lonnie, what do you think?
No idea.
Sorry about
It's a fair response.
think the church is the group on the line?
So you agree with Federico?
Yeah, I mean, the question of whether this is good enough to be worth restoring or not.
Yeah.
Putting that to one side.
Okay.
Because the church gave permission to the, assuming the fact.
No, the priest gave permission, not the
Ah. Does the priest have the authority to give the permission?
No. I don't know how church will work.
This would be apparent authority, presumably, right? So the answer would be yes, the priest probably has permission on behalf of the church, and the church is bound by the priest's action. Yeah.
So it seems to me that sort of I mean, you can't go after this 80-year-old woman who's good faith painting this thing. So
because it's just unfair.
You can't sue grandma.
Can you deprive her of the 53,000 euros? She wants the 53,000 euros. Can you take those away from her for Catherine's reason or other reasons?
Yeah, I think if you say the church gets her off the hook, the facing, you also say that the church gets the money, the positive side.
Yeah. Okay, so this seems like enough. It's by no means the end of the case study. This takes, an hour to do in a law class. But the idea, the pedagogic principle, tried to be exemplified here, is you push. You get a complicated question on the table, and you try to extract the premises of individual students' responses and push. And ideally, by the end of the process, you extract from the discussion some insights that nobody would have had at the beginning. But along the way, you're delivering feedback. Okay, that's the hypothesis anyway. So now I'm going to show you a clip from a online analog to this, which I think you will see has some of the features we just described and not others. So I'm going to just jump into the middle of, well, first an explanation. This is, the teaching fellow here is Rachel Sachs. Ordinarily, in fact, with the exception, one exception of the moment we're going to see, the principle I adhered to was that there were specifically Chatham House rules governed all of the online sessions. They were not filmed, they were not audio recorded, and the participants were forbidden to report with attribution anything said within them. They could report things that were said, but not who said them. So all this was designed to preserve a zone of free inquiry. But I asked Rachel to ask her students if we could suspend these rules just once for this segment so that we could capture a view of how this pedagogy works. Now, having said all that, you realize that there's a Heisenberg principle operating here. This may not be truly representative. They know they're being watched, but with that caveat, let's watch them. Wait, yep, you're entirely right. I need a plug. Yes, yes.
Be able to get away with things because he is the big guy.
I think, in particular, your comment about transformation is really important, because the key concern here is, what do we mean when we say transformation? Well, they look very similar, but is it the transformation in purpose that's needed, or is it the transformation in appearance? So if you look at the Blanche case, while Jeff Koons did take sort of the legs directly from the photo, he reoriented them and he altered them a little bit, and he changed their he changed the location where they were situated in the photo completely. So it's a little bit different in that case, but here I do share your sort of a little bit unease where it just looks so similar, and so you have to focus on the purpose more here. Hillary, last comment, and then I'll move on to what the court did.
And I mean, I guess part of why I'm so torn about this one in particular is that, unlike with Blanche, this is such a specific image. These people are so specific, and that came out the Wednesday night event where somebody said, you know, are you supposed to recognize a genre here or these specific people? And because it is, I mean, I don't think this is that banal of a photo. It's sentimental, maybe, but it's, you know, it's a pretty striking photo. Those people are distinctive looking, and so it feels like Koons is not transforming. He's not making something out of this representative statement. He's making something out of this very specific image, and he's making something that's pretty similar. And so on the one hand, I feel very much like it's still pretty transformative, but with the amount and with the purpose, especially because, and this is, you know, bringing in moral rights, which, you know, the court isn't really looking at, but these people specifically, not so much even the photographer with the photographer's IP content, but these people, they're sort of being held up and mocked in this context in a way that feels a little unearned to me. So that's one of the reasons I'm very, very torn about this one.
And I think the court shares your concern about that in particular. So, and in a moment, we're going to get to sort of the rhetoric that the court used in reaching its conclusions. But for now, I'll just tell you that in this case, the court held that there was no fair use, and they held against Koons on each of the factors. But on the first factor, which we've been discussing primarily, the court held that the sculpture doesn't critically comment on the original photo. The court sort of limited satire to commentary that at least partly sort of conjures up the original, and it said, but it's not really critically commenting on it. It's sort of mocking them, but not with any sort of idea that we can discern. But then he's also saying, in regards to the first factor, the appropriation is commercial. And he's also saying there's bad faith. So there's evidence here that Koons bought the postcard and tore off the copyright mark. There's evidence that there was sort of a willful disregard for the rights that the photographer may have had. And so we're a little concerned about that kind of thing. So the judge in Rogers' case, also a Second Circuit case, held against Koons on fair use. So to briefly move to sort of fair use more generally, this is how it broke down in each case. You guys read Blanche.
Okay, so a couple of things to highlight. The students had read the opinion that generated the result over here, in Blanche versus Koons, involved the same litigant. They had not encountered this case before, however. Fortunately, Koons is a frequent litigant, so there are many such cases to choose among. So Rachel gave them one of the case studies, which is Rogers versus Koons, involved those images I showed up there. She described it briefly, and then she conducted a poll. So she asked them to vote. One of the tools in the interface here is you have to vote. And your votes appear as they are made. And the students voted in terms of the application of the fair use doctrine to this dispute, 8-6 in favor of fair use. Then she began calling on students. You call on them in the same way you call on them in a classroom. They're all listed in the right-hand side. You'd have to draw that window down in order to see all of them. There are 14 who are online. She says, okay, Jean, you voted for the plaintiff, explain why. And then she calls on somebody who voted for the defendant, and she gets them to air out their positions, push against each other, and she is pushing back against them or encouraging them, one or the other, as they deploy their views. But there's an answer that comes at the end. It's not just, let's exchange ideas here. At the end, she tells them what the outcome of the case was, who prevailed, why, and half of them discovered that they have misjudged what's likely to be the fruit here. And then she summarizes a bit the doctrine, moves on to another doctrine. So none of this is terribly surprising. It's engaged, active, learning using case studies to explore the nuances in a body of law that they've learned about through a lecture. So it's a flipped classroom, but flipped with an extra flip into the online environment. So, what do you think?
What about the blackboard? Seems very important for the case.
What about the blackboard?
Anything replacing it online?
It is possible, yes, to employ the blackboard, meaning that among the options that you can employ to fill in this space is a free drawing zone. Now, actually, in my classroom, I have an iPad with the paper function that I use to mark up. So I usually in the classroom have 2 or sometimes 3 screens going. One of them would be the case study. One of them will be the maps of either copyright doctrine or copyright theory. And one of them is the blackboard, as you're marking up in reaction to student comments. So in this respect, the online interface is a little bit clunkier because you have to be using one or another at the same time. You can have too many screens open, but there is a blackboard function. There's also some other things that appear here that don't appear in RearSpace. So you notice that there were some comments flowing here. So there's a chat box. And students are chatting while somebody else is speaking. And Rachel is watching the chat as she listens online. So she tries to integrate the substantive comments made in the written form and the substantive comments made in the oral form.
All over the world, there's this problem of English. Do you screen them for their ability in English when they enroll for the course? I mean, people that we heard were fluent, obviously, but what happens if there's somebody in Russia or China who really stumbles in their spoken English and might understand but have trouble speaking?
It's a good, difficult question. Yes, we do screen them. And we screen them both by reading their applications, just for the manifestation of English in their writing. We also included, in the end of the application, 3 SAT-style questions designed to test their English. But this is far from foolproof because they can get their friend who is more fluent than they are to answer it. And then you do discover on occasion. So this, right now, the teaching version we're doing right now, each of the 21 teaching fellows reports that he or she has one student who just can't speak English well enough to participate in the discussions. Now, typically, they can write. And so they can participate in the asynchronous discussions, but not the synchronous. And that's too bad. Note here, however, the Italian satellite is taught in Italian. The Brazilian satellite is taught in Portuguese. So the online courses are limited to English speakers, but the satellites are not.
Who can hear whom and who can see whom?
So the technology makes it possible to configure this interface where everybody sees everybody. But to do that, you need high bandwidth for all the participants. And the parts of the world where this is offered just don't make that feasible. And so instead, what almost all the teaching fellows, exercising the substantial autonomy they enjoy, have done is disable all but one of the video. Now, Rachel's doing it, so she's always visible in the upper right-hand corner. Many of the other teaching fellows would swap that out so that the teacher is visible when the teacher is speaking, and the speaker is speaking when a student is speaking. So you get visual contact, but you don't see them, Hollywood Squares style. Henry?
Copyright law in other countries enrich the conversation because, dealing with American copyright law presumably, but people who are coming from China and from Russia where copyright law is rather different, I would imagine, than it is here.
Yeah.
It exists.
So a very good question. So last year, when I first offered this course, I had 2 curricula. And 250 students did one, 250 students did the other. They watched the same recorded lecture, but they had different reading assignments. And one was a heavily US-oriented case law curriculum, and the other was a global curriculum that surveyed the law in many jurisdictions and juxtaposed them. And then at the end of the course, we assessed performance, and we asked them what they preferred. In terms of the quality of their performance on the final exam, they were the same. In terms of what they preferred, heavy toward the US curriculum. Why? Well, the US students, not surprisingly, preferred it, but the students outside the United States also strongly preferred it for one or both of 2 reasons. They preferred deep immersion in a single system than a more superficial touching on several, or they were operating in countries that recognized, for better or worse, the growing power and influence of the US model. So this one is focused on US systems, although the satellites frequently juxtapose the US model with the law in their respective countries. Willis.
Seems like the feedback that you talked about is focused on feedback to the individual through the questioning, and I'm wondering if there is any possibility for group feedback and somehow communicating to the entire group as to how effective they are as a group of participants, as opposed to just individuals.
Well, the short answer is we don't do that. We hadn't attempted that, but it's an intriguing possibility.
Breakout rooms, you could actually get students to work in pairs of 2 to 3.
Yes, they do indeed do that. In fact, we're doing that a lot this year. The teaching fellows are employing this, so they, instead of leaping into a case study, as in this case, they divide them into 2, 3, or 4 groups. They formulate the arguments of the party to whom they've been assigned, and then they convene again with a spokesperson. And the students love this. The breakout rooms they really like. But that's different from your question. I might say that one of the reasons it appears for the high retention rates here, this is much higher than most online courses, one of the reasons is they bond, they form communities. They look forward to speaking with each other. So one of the things happening this year, I'm trying to get my head around, is that the gardens, the forest is flourishing. The gardens are not. But does that mean the students are reluctant to participate? No, they show up for their sessions, for their 80-minute discussions, and they won't stop. They carry on for a full 2 hours in most instances. So they're passionate about the synchronous discussions. They're not particularly interested in talking with the members of their group online. They are interested in talking with the Harvard Law School students online and vice versa, but they're not particularly interested in their little enclave. Now, back to the main point. They form communities, and the communities carry them through what is a fairly arduous course. But your question suggests we could do a better job in capitalizing that community feel and assessing collective performance. We don't. Lonnie, last question.
So, do you think that in 5 or 10 years, you will be superfluous?
I'm sorry, I will be what?
That superfluous, that what you've created is really engaging, and the students, as well as the TFs, are extremely effective, and it just gave me the sense that in 10 years this will be happening, and the actual professor doesn't need to be present.
Well, I hope that's not true.
Except for you, all the other professors will be gone with you.
Okay, so I want to say 2 things in response. First is that the most important principle underlying this particular initiative is the importance of teaching. This is the opposite of a MOOC, which minimizes the role of individual teachers engaging with individual students. The premise of this venture is that's where real learning happens, and I want to preserve it. So an implication of that is this is not the solution to the crisis in the funding model of universities. In fact, the student-to-faculty ratio in this is a little worse than in Harvard Law School. I forbid the satellites to be larger than 30. Yeah, they point out that I have 94 students. It's a little problematic, this comparison, but okay. So this model privileges teachers. So teachers will not disappear. Now, will I disappear? No. I'm probably, at least not for the foreseeable future, no, because I created the intellectual backbone, which is the set of recorded lectures. That holds the whole thing together, and I have to keep adjusting them because the law keeps changing. So I created 12 of them last year. I re-recorded 3 this year. I have to hold the spine, and then everything operates in relation to the spine. I think we...
That must be a huge part of the job.
Yes, that's true. The Wednesday meetings. Actually, Ruth came to the Wednesday meeting this time, and it's a tumult because they have to teach us stuff tomorrow. And yeah. Thank you very much.